Between 1945 and 1975, American families made 30 ground beef dinners that cost $1. Ground beef dinners that fed 6 people on 1 pound of beef when budgets were tight. Potatoes, rice, and cabbage stretched expensive meat that filled every belly. By 1990, everyone disappeared from dinner tables nationwide. Number 5 hides beef in unexpected layers and granules. Number 10 transforms leftover rice into something special. These are the 30 forgotten ground beef dinners that kept America fed. Depression-era hamburgers saved families when a pound of ground beef cost 66 cents, and feeding 6 people seemed impossible. Resourceful cooks discovered that mixing 1 pound of beef with 12 slices of torn white bread and 1 beaten egg could create 18 small patties instead of 6 regular burgers. The bread absorbed meat juices during cooking and expanded to create filling portions that satisfied hungry children who never knew they were eating stretched meat. The technique required soaking bread pieces in milk until soggy, then squeezing out excess liquid before combining with seasoned ground beef, chopped onion, salt, and pepper. Hands mixed everything until bread disappeared completely into the meat. Small patties formed easily and cooked fast in cast-iron skillets greased with bacon fat, saved in coffee cans beside the stove. Each patty cost roughly 4 cents to make in 1970. A complete family dinner with 6 patties, boiled potatoes, and canned green beans totaled 70 cents. The patties tasted like regular hamburgers because bread absorbed beef flavor during cooking. Children ate them on buns with ketchup and never complained. Mothers made them 3 times weekly during tight months. The recipe disappeared when prosperity returned, and stretching meat no longer mattered to families who could afford waste. Beef and cabbage skillet cost 75 cents total when a head of cabbage sold for 15 cents and fed 8 people from a single skillet. 1 pound of ground beef browned in bacon grease, while a whole cabbage got shredded by hand using sharp knives on wooden cutting boards. The combination created a meal that filled the largest families without requiring expensive ingredients or complicated cooking techniques. The process started with browning beef in a deep cast-iron skillet, breaking meat into small crumbles as fat rendered out. Chopped onions cooked in the beef fat until translucent and sweet. Shredded cabbage piled into the skillet in stages because 1 whole head would not fit at once. As bottom layers wilted and reduced, more raw cabbage got added until everything cooked down into a tender mixture that barely filled half the original skillet. Salt, black pepper, and sometimes caraway seeds provided the only seasoning. The dish cooked for 30 minutes until cabbage turned soft and slightly browned at the edges. Vinegar splashed over the top added tanginess that children loved. Served with boiled potatoes or thick bread slices, the meal satisfied everyone. Each serving cost approximately 9 cents. The dish fell from favor when convenience foods replaced one-pot cooking and fresh cabbage seemed old-fashioned to modern families. Hamburger hash turned 80 cents worth of ingredients into a complete dinner that required only 1 skillet and 20 minutes of cooking time. Ground beef, diced potatoes, and chopped onions combined into a dish that tasted rich, despite containing the cheapest grocery store ingredients available during the 1960s and 1970s. 3 medium potatoes got peeled and diced into half-inch cubes that cooked evenly in hot skillets. 1 pound of ground beef browned first, while 1 large onion cooked until golden. The diced raw potatoes joined the mixture with just enough water to create steam for cooking the potatoes through without burning. A lid trapped heat and moisture for 15 minutes, while everything cooked together and potatoes absorbed beef flavors. The finished hash turned golden brown and crispy at the bottom, where potatoes caramelized against the hot skillet. Salt and pepper provided the only necessary seasoning. Some families added a can of tomatoes or leftover vegetables, but the basic version cost only 80 cents and filled 6 bowls. A fried egg on top made it feel fancy for Sunday breakfast-dinner combinations. The hash disappeared when frozen hash browns and microwave meals replaced skillets. Nobody wanted to stand at the stove dicing potatoes when convenience promised the same result in half the time.
Many of you have been asking where to find these recipes. We've gathered hundreds of them from the Depression era through the 1970s in our cookbook, Grandma's Kitchen. Complete instructions, pro tips in 10 chapters. Link is in the description below. Now, let's get back to the video.
Spanish rice with ground beef cost 80 cents and transformed plain white rice into something children thought tasted exotic and special. 1 pound of beef stretched across 2 cups of uncooked rice that tripled in volume during cooking and created enough food to feed 8 people from a single pot. The method required browning ground beef with diced onions and bell peppers when available. Uncooked rice got added directly to the beef and stirred until grains turned slightly golden and absorbed beef fat. A large can of tomatoes, 2 cups of water, and basic seasonings like salt, pepper, and chili powder completed the dish. Everything simmered together for 25 minutes until rice absorbed all liquid and turned tender. The rice absorbed beef and tomato flavors while cooking and came out reddish brown and slightly spicy. Each grain separated perfectly when cooked properly. The dish reheated beautifully and tasted better the next day. A handful of shredded cheese on top made it feel like restaurant food. The complete meal cost 10 cents per person. Spanish rice fell from popularity when Tex-Mex restaurants became common, and home-cooked versions seemed plain by comparison. Instant rice packages and seasoning packets replaced the from-scratch method that grandmothers used. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes cost 85 cents and became the ultimate comfort meal that appeared on tables 3 times weekly during the 1960s and 1970s. 1 pound of ground beef created enough rich gravy to cover mountains of mashed potatoes that filled hungry children who never realized they were eating budget food. Ground beef is browned in a heavy skillet until fat is rendered out completely. Flour sprinkled over the browned meat and stirred constantly for 2 minutes created a roux that would thicken the gravy. Milk added slowly while stirring prevented lumps from forming. The mixture simmered until it thickened into rich gravy that coated the back of wooden spoons. Salt, pepper, and sometimes onion powder provided simple seasoning. 5 pounds of potatoes, boiled and mashed with butter and milk, created the base. The beef gravy, ladled generously over potato mountains, made each plate look abundant despite containing inexpensive ingredients. The combination tasted rich and satisfied appetites completely. A can of green beans on the side completed the meal. Each serving cost approximately 14 cents. The dish disappeared when gravy became associated with unhealthy eating and instant mashed potatoes replaced the real thing. Nobody wanted to peel potatoes or stand stirring gravy when faster options existed. These 5 meals fed millions of American families for under $1. Each one stretched a single pound of beef using different tricks that made small amounts seem abundant. But the next 5 dishes took stretching even further, hiding beef in ways that made 1 pound feed 10 people instead of 6. Mock chop suey cost 85 cents and convinced children they were eating Chinese restaurant food, even though mothers made it from Depression-era ingredients found in every American pantry. Ground beef replaced expensive Chinese meats, while vegetables and simple seasonings created flavors that seemed exotic to families who rarely ate out. 1 pound of ground beef browned with chopped onions and celery until vegetables softened and turned translucent. A can of tomatoes, a handful of uncooked rice, and water created the base. Some families added chopped cabbage or canned bean sprouts when available. Soy sauce from small bottles provided authentic flavor. Everything simmered together until rice absorbed all liquid and vegetables cooked tender. The finished dish looked colorful and smelled different from regular American food. Served over additional rice or with saltine crackers, it stretched to feed 8 people. Children loved the slightly sweet and savory flavor. The name mock meant it imitated real chop suey without authentic ingredients or expensive cuts of pork. The dish faded when actual Chinese restaurants became affordable and American families could order real takeout. Nobody wanted imitation Asian food when the genuine version existed. The recipe disappeared from family cookbooks as frozen dinners offered similar flavors with less effort. Beef and noodle skillet cost 85 cents and created a complete one-pan meal that required no oven and minimal cleanup. Ground beef, egg noodles, and canned tomatoes combined in a single cast-iron skillet that went from stove to table in 30 minutes. 1 pound of ground beef, browned with diced onions, while water boiled in a kettle. Uncooked egg noodles joined the beef mixture along with boiling water, a can of tomatoes, and simple seasonings. A tight lid trapped steam that cooked the noodles directly in the beef mixture. Stirring occasionally prevented sticking and ensured even cooking. The noodles absorbed beef flavors while they cooked and turned tender in 15 minutes. The finished skillet contained tender noodles coated in beef and tomato sauce that tasted rich despite simple ingredients. Some families added a sprinkle of cheese before serving. Each portion cost approximately 14 cents and provided a satisfying meal. Children enjoyed eating directly from the skillet when families gathered around the table. The dish disappeared when boxed pasta meals, like Hamburger Helper, offered similar results, with less measuring and thinking. Pre-mixed seasonings and dried noodles replaced the from-scratch method. Nobody wanted to calculate water amounts when a box contained everything pre-measured. SOS cost 85 cents, and military families brought the recipe home from bases where it fed thousands of soldiers on tight budgets. The official military name was creamed beef, but everyone called it SOS, which stood for phrases mothers never repeated in front of children. 1 pound of ground beef, browned in a skillet until fully cooked and drained of excess fat. Butter melted in the same pan before flour stirred in to create a pale roux. Milk added gradually, while stirring constantly prevented lumps and created smooth white gravy. The cooked ground beef returned to the gravy and simmered until everything heated through and flavors combined. Salt and pepper provided the only necessary seasonings. The creamy beef mixture ladled over toasted white bread that absorbed the gravy and softened beneath the weight. Each serving required 2 slices of toast and a generous scoop of beef gravy. The combination tasted comforting and filling. A complete family meal cost approximately 14 cents per person. The dish worked equally well for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It faded from tables when cream-based gravies fell out of favor and white bread became associated with unhealthy eating. Nobody wanted simple comfort food when dietary trends demanded more sophisticated ingredients. Poor man's stew cost 90 cents and turned a handful of vegetables into a hearty meal that simmered all afternoon and filled the house with smells that made children hungry before dinner even started. Ground beef replaced expensive stew meat, while potatoes and carrots stretched the meal to feed 8 people from a single pot. 1 pound of ground beef, browned and drained before vegetables joined the pot. 3 large potatoes and 4 carrots, peeled and cut into chunks, created bulk. 1 diced onion and a can of tomatoes provided flavor. Water or beef bouillon created the broth. Everything simmered together for 90 minutes until vegetables turned fork tender and broke apart easily. The long cooking time allowed flavors to meld and develop depth. The stew thickened naturally as potatoes broke down and released their starch. Some families added frozen peas during the last 10 minutes. The finished stew tasted rich and satisfying. Served with bread for dipping, it made a complete meal. Each bowl cost approximately 15 cents. The name acknowledged its humble origins without shame. The stew disappeared when crock-pots and slow cookers changed how families approached simmered dishes. Nobody wanted to watch a pot on the stove when electric appliances promised the same result unsupervised. American goulash cost 90 cents and bore no resemblance to authentic Hungarian goulash, despite sharing the name. Ground beef, elbow macaroni, and tomatoes combined in one pot to create a dish that every Midwestern family made weekly throughout the 1960s and 1970s. 1 pound of ground beef browned with diced onions and garlic until meat crumbled into small pieces. 2 cups of uncooked elbow macaroni joined the beef along with canned tomatoes, tomato sauce, water, and basic seasonings like salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar to balance acidity. Everything simmered together for 20 minutes, while macaroni absorbed liquid and cooked tender directly in the beef mixture. The finished dish turned reddish-brown and smelled like home to millions of children who ate it weekly. Some families added shredded cheddar cheese on top or stirred in frozen corn. The complete meal required only 1 pot and minimal cleanup. Each generous serving cost 15 cents. The dish reheated perfectly and actually tasted better the next day as flavors melded overnight. American goulash disappeared when Italian pasta dishes gained popularity and traditional one-pot meals seemed unsophisticated. Nobody wanted simple macaroni and beef when restaurants offered dozens of authentic pasta shapes with complex sauces. 10 forgotten dinners down, 20 more to go. Each one cost less than $1 and stretched ground beef in ways modern cooks forgot. The next 10 dishes get even more creative, hiding beef in unexpected places and using techniques grandmothers perfected during hard times. Hamburger soup cost 90 cents and turned 1 pound of ground beef into 8 generous bowls of filling comfort that warmed cold winter evenings when heating bills consumed most of the family budget. Every ingredient came from cans or root cellars that kept vegetables fresh through long winters without refrigeration. 1 pound of ground beef browned in a large soup pot with diced onions until meat crumbled and onions softened. 3 diced potatoes, 2 sliced carrots, and 1 diced celery stalk joined the beef along with a can of tomatoes and enough water to cover everything by 2 inches. Salt, pepper, and a bay leaf provided simple seasoning. The soup simmered for 45 minutes until vegetables turned tender and flavors melded together into something greater than individual ingredients suggested. The finished soup contained chunks of vegetables and small pieces of beef, suspended in rich tomato broth. Some families added alphabet pasta during the last 10 minutes to make children excited about eating vegetables. Others stirred in a handful of barley or rice to make the soup even heartier. The soup tasted better on the second day after sitting overnight in the refrigerator, allowed flavors to deepen and develop. Each bowl cost approximately 11 cents and provided complete nutrition in a single dish. Served with saltine crackers or thick slices of bread for dunking, it satisfied the hungriest appetites. The soup froze beautifully and reheated without losing texture or flavor. Hamburger soup disappeared when canned soups became cheaper than making homemade versions, and convenience mattered more than taste. Nobody wanted to chop vegetables and simmer soup for an hour when opening a can took 30 seconds. Slumgullion cost 90 cents and earned its unappetizing name from World War I soldiers who ate similar dishes in military mess halls. Despite the crude name, families served it proudly because it stretched ingredients further than almost any other ground beef dish and tasted surprisingly good. 1 pound of ground beef browned with chopped onions in a large pot, while 2 cups of elbow macaroni boiled in salted water on another burner. A large can of tomatoes, a smaller can of tomato sauce, and a handful of diced celery joined the beef. Basic seasonings like salt, pepper, oregano, and a pinch of sugar balanced the acidity. The drained cooked macaroni, stirred into the beef mixture, along with enough reserved pasta water, to keep everything moist. The entire pot simmered together for 15 minutes, while flavors combined and macaroni absorbed the tomato beef sauce. The finished slumgullion looked similar to American goulash, but contained less liquid and more vegetables. Some families added diced bell peppers or frozen corn to increase the vegetable content. Others topped each serving with shredded cheese that melted into the hot mixture. The dish reheated beautifully and actually improved overnight as the macaroni continued absorbing flavors. Each serving cost 12 cents and provided a complete meal in a single bowl. Children never complained about the funny name because the taste made them ask for seconds. Slumgullion disappeared when the name itself became embarrassing and families wanted meals that sounded sophisticated. Nobody wanted to serve dinner with a name that sounded like something unpleasant. The recipe faded even though the taste remained delicious and budget-friendly. Beef and potato patties cost 90 cents and transformed leftover mashed potatoes into something completely new that children thought was a special treat rather than recycled food. 3 cups of cold mashed potatoes, mixed with 1 pound of ground beef, created 18 small patties that fried crispy on the outside and stayed tender inside. Cold leftover mashed potatoes worked better than fresh because the chilled texture made shaping patties easier. 1 pound of ground beef mixed thoroughly with the potatoes, along with 1 beaten egg that bound everything together. Salt, pepper, and sometimes a splash of Worcestershire sauce provided seasoning. Hands formed the mixture into palm-sized patties about ½ an inch thick. The patties chilled in the refrigerator for 30 minutes to help them hold their shape during cooking. A cast-iron skillet heated with bacon grease or butter created the perfect surface for frying. Each patty cooked for 4 minutes per side until deep golden brown and crispy. The exterior crisped beautifully, while the interior stayed moist and flavorful. The combination of beef and potato created a texture unlike regular hamburgers or potato pancakes. Each patty cost 5 cents to make and provided substantial protein and carbohydrates in a single serving. Served with canned green beans or a simple salad, they made a complete dinner. Some families ate them for breakfast, with fried eggs on top. The patties froze well and reheated in skillets without losing texture. Beef and potato patties disappeared when leftover mashed potatoes became rare in homes where everyone ate exactly what they were served. Nobody made extra potatoes intentionally when meal planning eliminated waste. Ground beef and rice skillet cost 90 cents and proved that rice absorbed beef flavors better than pasta ever could when everything cooked together in a single pan. 1 pound of beef stretched across 2 cups of uncooked rice that expanded to feed 8 people without anyone noticing they were eating mostly grain. 1 pound of ground beef browned with diced onions in a deep skillet that had a tight-fitting lid. 1 cup of diced celery and 1 diced bell pepper joined the beef when available, though many families skipped vegetables entirely to save money. 2 cups of uncooked white rice stirred directly into the beef mixture along with 3½ cups of water or beef broth. Salt, pepper, and sometimes a sprinkle of soy sauce provided seasoning. A tight lid trapped steam while everything simmered for 20 minutes without stirring. The rice cooked perfectly in the beef juices and absorbed every bit of flavor, while the meat remained moist and tender throughout. The finished dish looked colorful with white rice studded with brown beef and flecks of vegetables. Some families added a can of cream of mushroom soup to make it richer, while others kept it simple to save money. Each serving cost 11 cents and provided complete protein and carbohydrates. The dish reheated beautifully and stayed moist even after sitting overnight in the refrigerator. Ground beef and rice skillet disappeared when rice-a-roni and other boxed rice mixes offered similar results with built-in seasonings. Nobody wanted to measure water and rice when a box contained everything pre-measured. Instant rice eventually replaced even the boxed versions when speed became more valuable than taste. Hamburger bean skillet cost 90 cents and combined two cheap proteins into one dish that satisfied growing teenagers who ate twice as much as younger children. 1 pound of beef plus 2 cans of beans created enough food to feed 10 people when served over rice or with bread on the side. 1 pound of ground beef browned in a large cast-iron skillet with diced onions until meat crumbled into small pieces. 2 cans of kidney beans or pinto beans drained and rinsed joined the beef along with a can of tomato sauce. Brown sugar, mustard, and a splash of vinegar created a sweet and tangy sauce that resembled barbecue flavor without expensive bottled sauce. Everything simmered together for 20 minutes while flavors combined and the sauce thickened slightly. The finished dish looked like loose chili, but tasted sweeter and less spicy. Some families added diced bell peppers or a handful of corn for extra vegetables and color. The beans absorbed beef flavors during cooking and became creamy on the edges while staying firm in the centers. Served over white rice or with thick slices of bread, the meal satisfied even the hungriest appetites. Each serving cost 9 cents and provided double protein from both beef and beans. The dish improved overnight as beans continued soaking up flavors. Hamburger bean skillet disappeared when 3-bean salad and cold bean dishes became more popular than hot bean meals. Nobody wanted warm beans when cold salads seemed more modern and sophisticated. Canned baked beans eventually replaced home-cooked bean dishes entirely because convenience mattered more than the superior taste of made-from-scratch meals. 15 Forgotten Meals revealed 15 different ways to make $1 feed an entire family. Soup stretched beef with water. Rice absorbed every drop of flavor. Beans doubled the protein without doubling the cost. But the next 5 dishes pushed stretching even further, using techniques that seem impossible today. Beef tomato skillet cost 90 cents and relied almost entirely on canned tomatoes to create enough volume to feed 6 people from a single pound of meat. 3 large cans of tomatoes transformed 1 pound of beef into a saucy dish that ladled over rice, potatoes, or bread, depending on what else the pantry held. 1 pound of ground beef browned with diced onions and garlic in a deep skillet. 3 14-ounce cans of diced tomatoes joined the beef along with their juices. Some families used 1 can of tomato sauce plus 2 cans of diced tomatoes for thicker consistency. Salt, pepper, oregano, and a pinch of sugar to balance acidity provided the only necessary seasonings. The mixture simmered uncovered for 30 minutes, while liquid reduced and flavors concentrated. The finished dish contained tender beef suspended in thick tomato sauce that clung to rice or soaked into bread beautifully. Some families stirred in frozen green beans during the last 10 minutes to add vegetables without spending extra money. Others topped each serving with a sprinkle of Parmesan cheese when special occasions called for something fancy. Each serving cost 15 cents and provided complete nutrition despite simple ingredients. The dish reheated perfectly and tasted better the next day after flavors melded overnight. Leftover beef tomato skillet made excellent filling for stuffed peppers when mixed with cooked rice. The recipe disappeared when pasta sauce in jars became cheaper than buying 3 cans of tomatoes. Nobody wanted to open multiple cans and simmer sauce for 30 minutes when jarred sauce poured ready to use. Convenience won, even though homemade versions tasted fresher and contained no preservatives or added sugars. Porcupine meatballs cost 95 cents and got their unusual name from uncooked rice grains that poked out of each meatball like porcupine quills when everything finished cooking. 1 pound of ground beef mixed with half a cup of uncooked rice created enough meatballs to feed 6 people without requiring expensive breadcrumbs or multiple eggs. Ground beef mixed with uncooked white rice, 1 beaten egg, diced onion, salt and pepper formed the base. Hands shaped the mixture into golf ball-sized meatballs that went directly into a baking dish without browning first. A can of tomato soup thinned with 1 can of water poured over the meatballs and covered everything completely. A tight foil covering trapped steam that cooked both the meat and the rice simultaneously during the 45-minute baking time. The rice absorbed tomato flavors while cooking and expanded to make each meatball larger and more filling. The finished meatballs looked striped with white rice grains that stuck out in all directions, like animal quills. The tomato sauce reduced and thickened into rich gravy that coated each meatball perfectly. Some families added diced bell peppers to the sauce for extra vegetables and color. Each serving contained 3 meatballs and cost approximately 16 cents. Served over mashed potatoes or with bread, the meal satisfied hearty appetites. Children loved the funny name and the unusual appearance. Swedish meatballs from frozen packages offered similar appeal with significantly less effort and time investment. Salisbury steak cost 95 cents and convinced children they were eating real steak, even though mothers made it from ground beef shaped into oval patties and smothered in brown gravy. 1 pound of ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, 1 beaten egg, diced onion, salt and pepper formed into 4 large oval patties shaped like miniature steaks. The patties seared in a hot skillet for 3 minutes per side until deep brown crusts formed. The browned patties moved to a plate while onions cooked in the beef drippings until soft and golden. Flour stirred into the onions and beef fat created a roux. Beef broth added gradually while stirring prevented lumps. The mixture simmered until thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. The patties returned to the gravy and simmered for 15 minutes until cooked through and tender. The finished steaks looked impressive, smothered in rich brown gravy, studded with caramelized onions. Some families added sliced mushrooms to the gravy when grocery budgets allowed occasional luxuries. Each steak paired with mashed potatoes and green beans created a plate that looked like restaurant food. Each serving cost approximately 24 cents, but seemed expensive because of the fancy name and presentation. The name itself became dated, and nobody wanted to serve food that reminded people of hospital cafeterias or school lunches. Ground beef stroganoff cost 95 cents and brought Russian elegance to American dinner tables by replacing expensive beef strips with ground meat that cost a fraction of the price. Sour cream and egg noodles transformed a humble hamburger into something that seemed sophisticated enough for company dinners. 1 pound of ground beef, browned with sliced onions and mushrooms when the budget allowed fresh mushrooms instead of canned. Flour sprinkled over the beef mixture and stirred for 1 minute created thickness for the sauce. Beef broth added gradually created a rich base. Sour cream stirred in at the end provided the characteristic tangy flavor and creamy texture that defined stroganoff. Salt, pepper, and a touch of paprika completed the seasoning. The mixture never boiled after adding sour cream because high heat would cause the cream to separate and turn grainy. Egg noodles boiled separately and drained well before the beef mixture spooned generously over top. The finished dish looked elegant with creamy beige sauce coating tender noodles and flecks of beef throughout. Some families garnished each plate with a sprinkle of paprika or fresh parsley when trying to impress guests. The meal tasted rich and indulgent despite costing less than $1 for 6 servings. Each portion cost approximately 16 cents, but seemed expensive because of the fancy Russian name and restaurant associations. Ground beef stroganoff disappeared when Hamburger Helper introduced its own stroganoff flavor that required less measuring and thinking. Beef and rice casserole cost 95 cents and baked everything together in a single dish that went from oven to table without requiring multiple pots or complicated timing. Ground beef, uncooked rice, and a can of soup created a complete meal that mothers assembled in 5 minutes before forgetting about it for an hour while the oven did all the work. 1 pound of ground beef is browned quickly and drained of excess fat before mixing with 1 cup of uncooked white rice. a can of cream of mushroom soup, a can of beef broth, and diced onions. Everything combined in a greased casserole dish and covered tightly with aluminum foil to trap steam. The covered dish baked at 350 degrees for 1 hour without stirring or checking. The rice absorbed all the liquid during baking and cooked perfectly tender, while the beef stayed moist and flavorful. The finished casserole came out steaming hot, with rice that absorbed beef and mushroom flavors throughout every grain. Some families stirred in frozen peas or corn during the last 15 minutes of baking. Others topped the finished casserole with shredded cheese and returned it to the oven until the cheese melted and turned golden. Each serving cost approximately 16 cents and required almost zero hands-on cooking time. Nobody wanted to turn on the oven for an hour when stovetop versions cooked in 20 minutes using pre-mixed ingredients. 20 dinners revealed 20 forgotten secrets that modern kitchens abandoned. Each recipe stretched meat further than the last, using techniques passed down through generations who understood hunger. The final 10 dishes represent the ultimate achievement in budget cooking. Meals that cost exactly $1, but fed families like feasts nobody could afford. Slug burgers cost 95 cents for 12 patties and originated in Mississippi during the Great Depression, when ground beef alone could never stretch far enough to feed large families who gathered around tables every evening, expecting full plates, regardless of how little money remained in household budgets after paying rent and utilities. Local cooks discovered that mixing beef with soaked bread, flour, or cornmeal created patties that fried crispy outside while staying tender inside, and nobody could taste the difference when proper seasonings masked the fillers that transformed 1 pound of expensive meat into enough food for 12 people instead of 6. 1 pound of ground beef mixed with 1 cup of flour or cornmeal soaked briefly in water until the mixture reached a consistency that formed patties easily without falling apart during the vigorous frying process. Some families used day-old bread torn into pieces and soaked in milk instead of flour, because bread was often cheaper and more readily available in homes where baking happened daily. Diced onions, salt, pepper, and sometimes a dash of hot sauce provided flavor that made each bite interesting and satisfying. The mixture formed into thin patties, slightly larger than regular hamburgers, because the fillers made each patty expand during cooking, creating impressive size from minimal meat. A cast-iron skillet heated with vegetable oil until shimmering hot and almost smoking created the perfect frying surface. Each patty fried for 3 minutes per side until deep golden brown and crispy on the edges, where the flour coating caramelized into a crunchy shell that sealed in all the juices. The exterior developed a substantial crust that contrasted beautifully with the tender interior, where beef and filler combined into a texture indistinguishable from pure meat patties. The slug burgers served on soft white buns with mustard, pickles, and onions tasted remarkably similar to regular hamburgers, perhaps even better because the fillers absorbed beef juices during cooking and became flavor bombs that pure beef patties could never match. Picadillo cost 95 cents and brought Cuban flavors to American kitchens, where budget-conscious cooks discovered that Latin seasoning made ground beef taste expensive, without requiring costly ingredients or complicated techniques that demanded culinary school training or years of practice under experienced chefs who understood international cuisine. 1 pound of ground beef browned with diced onions and bell peppers until vegetables softened completely and began releasing their natural sugars that caramelized slightly in the beef fat. Minced garlic joined the mixture and cooked until fragrant, filling the kitchen with aromas that made everyone hungry before dinner even finished cooking. 2 diced potatoes added bulk and substance, while a can of tomato sauce created the liquid base that would simmer everything together into a cohesive dish. The magic came from adding raisins, green olives, and capers that created complex flavors nobody expected from budget ingredients purchased at regular grocery stores rather than specialty markets. The raisins provided sweetness that balanced the salty brininess of olives and capers. Cumin, oregano, salt and pepper, dark raisins, and green olive slices throughout the red tomato base that coated everything evenly. The combination of sweet raisins and salty olives created a flavor profile that tasted sophisticated and worldly, introducing families to international cuisine without intimidating anyone with unfamiliar ingredients or strange cooking methods. Some families served it over white rice, while others used it as filling for empanadas or stuffed peppers that stretched the mixture even further. Children who normally refused vegetables ate the bell peppers without complaint because the overall flavor disguised them completely. Each serving cost approximately 16 cents and introduced families to international cuisine without expensive restaurant bills that could exceed the weekly grocery budget in a single meal. Shipwreck casserole cost exactly $1 and earned its dramatic name from the way ingredients layered haphazardly in a baking dish, like cargo scattered across the ocean floor after a disaster at sea, destroyed organized packing systems, and left everything tumbled together in chaotic arrangements that somehow worked, despite lacking any logical planning or careful consideration. Nothing got mixed together. Everything just stacked in random layers that somehow cooked perfectly and tasted harmonious, despite the chaotic assembly that looked more like thoughtless dumping than careful recipe construction. The bottom layer started with raw ground beef crumbled evenly across a greased 9x13 pan, breaking apart any clumps that might create uneven cooking or leave some areas without adequate protein. Sliced raw potatoes covered the beef completely, creating a barrier between meat and the layers that would follow above. Diced onions scattered over the potatoes without any particular pattern or arrangement. Uncooked rice sprinkled evenly as the next layer, creating a grain barrier that would absorb all the cooking liquids and expand dramatically during the long baking time. A can of kidney beans drained completely and spread across the rice added protein and fiber. A large can of tomato soup, thinned with 1 can of water, poured over everything, seeping down through all the layers and creating the cooking liquid that would steam everything to perfect doneness. Salt and pepper shaken generously over the top completed the assembly. Aluminum foil sealed the pan tightly to trap every bit of steam during the 90-minute baking time at 350 degrees. The long baking time allowed each layer to cook perfectly in the trapped steam while absorbing flavors from the layers above and below, creating a unified dish despite the chaotic construction method. The rice absorbed tomato soup and beef juices, expanding to 3 times its original volume. The potatoes steamed tender between the beef and onions, becoming soft and flavorful. Everything emerged hot and perfectly cooked, despite never being stirred or checked during the entire baking process. The finished casserole, cut into squares that showed distinct layers like geological strata in cliff faces. Beef upside-down pie cost exactly $1 and flipped traditional pie construction by putting the crust on top instead of bottom, which saved money by eliminating half the pastry while creating a dramatic presentation that impressed dinner guests who expected ordinary casseroles rather than innovative dishes that challenged conventional cooking wisdom and demonstrated creative problem-solving. The unusual technique came from Depression-era cooks who realized that one pie crust could cover a casserole dish just as effectively as 2 crusts could line and top a traditional pie pan, cutting ingredient costs in half without sacrificing any of the delicious combination of flaky pastry and savory filling that made meat pies so satisfying. 1 pound of ground beef browned with diced onions, celery, and bell peppers when available and affordable. A can of condensed tomato soup provided thickness and flavor without requiring multiple ingredients or complicated sauce-making techniques. Salt, pepper, and Worcestershire sauce completed the seasoning profile that made the filling taste rich and complex. The mixture spread evenly in a round baking dish, creating a uniform layer that would cook evenly under the crust. Biscuit dough rolled thin, or pie crust pastry draped over the top and crimped around the edges to seal in steam and prevent juices from bubbling out during the baking process. Several slits cut in the top crust allowed steam to escape, while creating an attractive pattern that suggested careful attention rather than rushed assembly. An egg beaten with 1 tablespoon of water, brushed over the top crust, created a golden, glossy finish when baked that resembled professional bakery products. The entire dish baked at 400 degrees for 25 minutes until the crust turned deep golden brown and flaky while the filling bubbled through the slits, releasing aromas that filled the kitchen and announced dinner was ready. Serving required flipping the entire pie onto a serving platter so the crust formed the base with the beef mixture on top, creating a dramatic unveiling that made children gasp with delight and wonder. Some families skipped the flipping and just served it casserole style with crust on top, because the risk of burns or spills outweighed the impressive presentation. Sloppy Joes cost exactly $1, including hamburger buns, and became the favorite messy meal that children begged for weekly, despite mothers hating how the sauce dripped everywhere and stained clothing permanently with bright red tomato marks that never washed out completely, regardless of how many times garments went through the washing machine with extra detergent. The sweet and tangy ground beef mixture slopped generously onto soft buns that absorbed sauce until barely able to hold together, creating the signature messiness that gave the sandwich its memorable name and required stacks of paper napkins at every place setting. 1 pound of ground beef browned with diced onions and bell peppers until vegetables softened and meat crumbled into small pieces that would distribute evenly throughout the sauce. Ketchup provided the base, approximately 1 cup, depending on desired thickness and how saucy the family preferred their sandwiches. Brown sugar balanced the acidity with sweetness that children especially appreciated. Yellow mustard added tang that cut through the richness. Worcestershire sauce contributed savory depth and umami complexity. A splash of vinegar brightened everything and prevented the sauce from tasting flat or one-dimensional. Salt and pepper completed the seasoning that transformed simple ingredients into something memorable and crave-worthy. The mixture simmered for 15 minutes until flavors melded and the sauce thickened enough to mound on buns without immediately sliding off, though some dripping was inevitable and actually desirable, because truly sloppy joes needed to be genuinely messy to live up to their name. The sauce should be thick enough to cling to the beef, but still saucy enough to drip down chins and fingers when eating, requiring frequent napkin use and creating the messy experience that defined authentic versions. Serving on cheap white hamburger buns that cost 19 cents for 8 buns completed the meal without breaking the budget. The soft buns absorbed sauce and became part of the eating experience rather than just vehicles for holding filling, contributing their own subtle sweetness. 5 more recipes remain, each costing exactly $1. These final dishes transformed the cheapest ingredients into meals families requested by name. Cheeseburger pie. Meanwhile, 1 pound of ground beef browned with diced onions until meat crumbled and onions turned translucent and slightly sweet. Ketchup, mustard, diced pickles, salt, and pepper stirred into the beef, created familiar cheeseburger flavors that everyone recognized immediately despite the unusual pie format. 2 beaten eggs mixed with half a cup of milk formed a custard that bound everything together when baked, transforming loose ingredients into cohesive slices that held together on forks. The beef mixture spread evenly in the partially baked crust, creating a uniform layer. 6 slices of American cheese that formed crispy edges where it touched the crust sides. Cutting revealed layers like geological strata, flaky crust on bottom, seasoned beef in the middle. Meat and potato pie cost exactly $1 and created a complete meal inside pastry that required no side dishes because the filling already contained meat, vegetables, and starch in perfectly balanced proportions that satisfied everyone from one neat package that sliced cleanly and looked impressive on every plate. 2 pie crusts prepared from scratch using flour, shortening, salt, and water, or bought ready-made from the refrigerated section, provided top and bottom layers. 1 crust lined a deep pie pan, while the other waited for topping after filling arrived. 1 pound of ground beef, browned quickly with diced onions until meat crumbled into small uniform pieces. 3 medium potatoes, peeled and diced into quarter-inch cubes, joined the beef along with 2 sliced carrots, when available and affordable. A can of beef gravy or homemade gravy made from beef bouillon, flour, and water provided moisture and flavor that coated every ingredient evenly. Salt, pepper, and a pinch of dried thyme completed the seasoning that made everything taste cohesive and purposeful. The mixture needed enough gravy to coat everything, but not so much that the pie became soupy and difficult to slice cleanly. The beef and potato mixture spooned into the bottom crust and mounded slightly in the center to create an attractive dome shape. The top crust draped over the filling and crimped tightly around the edges to seal in steam and prevent juices from bubbling out during the long baking time. Several decorative slits cut in the top crust allowed steam to escape while creating an attractive pattern that suggested care and attention. Egg beaten with 1 tablespoon of water brushed over the top crust created a golden, glossy finish when baked that resembled professional bakery products. Beef macaroni bake cost exactly $1 and united 2 of the cheapest ingredients available in any American grocery store: ground beef and elbow macaroni, with enough shredded cheese to make children believe they were eating something special and expensive, even though every component came from the bottom shelves, where bargain hunters found the best deals on generic brands. 1 pound of ground beef, browned with diced onions in a large skillet, while 2 cups of elbow macaroni boiled in heavily salted water for exactly 7 minutes until still slightly firm in the center, creating the al dente texture that would finish cooking during baking without turning mushy. Meanwhile, a simple sauce came together from a can of condensed tomato soup thinned with half a cup of milk that created the right consistency for coating pasta. The drained macaroni, cooked beef, and tomato sauce combined in a large mixing bowl with 1 cup of shredded cheddar cheese, salt, pepper, and a pinch of garlic powder that enhanced everything without overwhelming the simple flavors. Everything mixed thoroughly until every piece of macaroni got coated with sauce and cheese, distributed evenly throughout, before transferring to a greased casserole dish. An additional cup of shredded cheese, sprinkled across the top, created the golden, bubbly layer that made everyone reach for seconds before finishing firsts. The casserole baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes, until cheese melted completely and turned golden brown in spots where it touched the hot dish edges. The edges got slightly crispy where cheese met the pan, creating textural variety that made eating more interesting. The center stayed creamy and soft, with tender macaroni coated in beef and cheese sauce that clung to every curved surface. Some families added frozen peas or corn to increase vegetable content without significantly affecting the cost or changing the essential character. Others kept it simple because children preferred cheese and beef to anything green that might hide between the macaroni pieces. The finished casserole emerged from the oven smelling like comfort and security, filling the kitchen with aromas that announced dinner was ready. Steam rose when the serving spoon broke through the cheese crust for the first serving. Beef vegetable bake cost exactly $1 and solved the perpetual problem of getting children to eat vegetables by hiding them beneath a thick layer of mashed potatoes and cheese that disguised healthy ingredients as something indulgent and special, that nobody could refuse without seeming unreasonable about perfectly good food that other families would appreciate. 1 pound of ground beef browned with diced onions until meat crumbled into small uniform pieces that distributed evenly throughout the finished dish. 2 cups of frozen mixed vegetables, typically carrots, peas, corn, and green beans, packaged together in economical bags, joined the beef directly from the freezer without thawing, saving time and preventing mushiness that happened when frozen vegetables thawed before cooking. A can of cream of mushroom soup provided creamy binding, while a can of beef broth added moisture and flavor that made everything taste rich rather than bland. Salt, pepper, and garlic powder completed the simple seasoning that required no complicated spice combinations or hard-to-find herbs. Everything combined in a large bowl before transferring to a greased 9x13 baking dish that would feed 8 people comfortably. The mixture spread evenly across the bottom, creating a uniform layer. 3 cups of instant mashed potatoes, prepared according to package directions with butter and milk, created the topping layer. The mashed potatoes smoothed across the beef and vegetable layer like frosting on a birthday cake, creating complete coverage that sealed in everything underneath. 2 cups of shredded cheddar cheese, sprinkled generously across the potato layer, completed the assembly that looked impressive despite simple construction. The casserole baked uncovered at 375 degrees for 35 minutes until cheese melted completely and turned golden brown around the edges where it touched the hot pan. The potatoes formed a slight crust on top that contrasted beautifully with the soft, creamy filling underneath, where vegetables steamed to perfect tenderness. Some families used real mashed potatoes instead of instant. Instant saved significant time and worked perfectly well for busy weeknight dinners, when speed mattered more than minor taste differences that only food snobs noticed or cared about. Oklahoma onion burgers cost exactly $1 for 6 burgers and represented the final evolution of Depression-era meat stretching, where paper-thin beef patties got smashed onto restaurant griddles with handfuls of thinly sliced onions that caramelized directly into the meat during cooking and created flavor so intense that nobody noticed or cared about the tiny amount of actual beef in each burger that would seem inadequate by modern standards. 1 pound of ground beef divided into 6 portions instead of the usual 4, creating smaller amounts that seemed inadequate until the onion technique transformed them into substantial burgers that satisfied hearty appetites. 2 large yellow onions sliced paper-thin on mandolin slicers, or carefully with extremely sharp knives, created mountains of onion strands that would shrink dramatically during cooking, but provided enough volume to make each burger seem substantial. Each small portion of beef rolled into a ball and placed on a smoking hot griddle or cast-iron skillet, preheated until water droplets danced and evaporated instantly. A generous handful of sliced onions piled on top of each beef ball before a sturdy metal spatula smashed everything flat against the hot surface, with enough force to create intimate contact that promoted proper searing and caramelization. The smashing technique was absolutely crucial. 1 hard press flattened the beef and onions together into patties barely thicker than the cooking surface itself. The extreme thinness allowed complete caramelization of onions directly into the beef, while creating crispy, lacy edges that provided textural contrast and visual appeal. After 3 minutes of undisturbed cooking, a sturdy spatula scraped under the entire patty to flip everything for 2 more minutes on the second side. The finished patties emerged with onions completely integrated into the beef structure, some strands charred crispy and dark, others soft and jammy sweet, all contributing intense flavor that made the small amount of meat seem substantial and satisfying. Each burger, served on a cheap white bun with pickles and mustard, created a complete meal that satisfied hearty appetites, despite containing minimal beef by weight. The onions provided bulk and flavor, while the caramelization created umami depth that rivaled expensive steaks cooked in fancy restaurants. Some families added a slice of American cheese that melted over the onion-studded patty, creating additional richness. Each burger cost approximately 17 cents, tasted extraordinary, despite humble origins in Depression-era Oklahoma, where restaurant owners needed to stretch beef supplies. Oklahoma onion burgers faded when fast food chains standardized burger construction with thick patties and minimal toppings. 30 forgotten dinners, 30 different ways to stretch $1 into meals that fed entire families. In 1990, every single recipe disappeared. Convenience replaced creativity, and abundance made resourcefulness unnecessary. These dishes exist now only in memories, representing an era when making something from nothing wasn't just cooking, it was survival.